But I want to go now to Bridget McKenzie. She's the Shadow Infrastructure and Transport Minister. She joins me live from Canberra. Thanks for joining us, Bridget. You must be looking on to events in London with a sense of history. Of course, the Prime Minister will be heading over there tomorrow. Fantastic that he's going to be taking 10 Aussies representing various states and various sort of angles of the country, if you like, elements of the country.
Absolutely, Chris. I think the outpouring of love and affection and respect that you've seen from right across our wide brown land on the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. She had a great affinity with our country, particularly rural and regional Australians. I had the opportunity myself to meet her and was introduced by Julia Gillard actually as our newest National Party senator, and she said, "How new is new?" We corresponded on our joint love of horse racing and hunting and farming. She very much embodied not only that great spirit of duty and service that you need in a constitutional monarchy for it to be successful, but also her humanity, I think, and her humour really sparked a connection with regional Australians, and it's great to see so many heading over with the Prime Minister next in a couple of days.
Well, let's have a look at some domestic issues. The National Cabinet today extending payments for COVID isolation periods. I just feel that just everything's always going too slowly when it comes to COVID. There are reputable medical experts who are saying it's time to get rid of all these restrictions. If you're symptomatic, if you're sick, stay home, obviously, but don't we need to actually get back to normal ASAP?
Well, we don't need state government mandates to tell us when we've got gastro or chickenpox that we need to stay at home. Australians do the right thing and stay at home from work when they have those significant illnesses. Obviously, while state premiers are still putting in those mandated stay-at-home orders, there needs to be some level of support. But I'm looking forward to a day when, if you're sick and shouldn't be sharing whatever you've got with your work colleagues, that you stay at home.
Yeah, I think everybody's got that message. If they didn't have it before COVID, they certainly practice it now. Now, with so many payments going out, of course, there has been rorting. The Prime Minister had to admit to that today.
Services Australia identified that since the 20th of July 2022, 2.6% of all claims received triggered real-time fraud checks in the system, and of those, more than 50% were subsequently rejected.
Yeah, so they're actually checking out 2.5% of claims, and more than half of them are dodgy. So we're looking at rorting of at least 1.5% of all claims, possibly a lot higher. It's another reason why you've got to wrap up these payments, don't you? Because people will find a way to rort them.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are some Australians that do the wrong thing, and that's unfortunate. I know when you're in government, you have to make some really tough decisions, particularly about the COVID disaster payment. You know, once we're 80% vaccinated, what do we do with that payment? When do we make decisions to taper that support to Australians off? They're the serious decisions that governments have to make. You know, state premiers are the ones handing out the mandates. You know, I hope they'll be assisting with the stumping up of the cash as well. But I think Services Australia's systems in place to, as your story alluded to, highlight when fraud's occurring, and their auditing teams that go in and run the ruler over that, and then that money will have to be repaid by those Australians.
The other point, of course, the more we continue with all these extra and extraordinary payments, the more that fuels inflation. Inflation is a real problem at the moment. We've seen the stock market crash today on the back of inflation in the US. People are now seriously talking about a serious recession globally. Where are we placed? Does Australia need to fear recession?
Well, Chris, I think this is one of the challenges for Jim Chalmers and Anthony Albanese heading into their first budget. We can see inflationary pressures on the rise. The RBA, our Reserve Bank, has taken swift and quite strong action in their recent rate rises to put downward pressure, but you can't just leave it all up to the RBA. There has to be commensurate behavioural change within the government to actually ensure that fiscal policy also puts downward pressure on inflation and that they work in harmony together. So that's a real challenge for the government heading into their budget to get those settings right. Investing in infrastructure projects, for instance, that build that long-term productivity capacity into our economy long-term are good things for government to invest in. But as you say, cash payments out into our broader economy can have an inflationary effect, and the government will have to have a mind to that as they go forward.
Well, that's exactly the problem I think we're starting to emerge with this upcoming budget late next month, because there's been a lot of talk about the need to constrain government spending. Yes, they have to reduce government spending, but there has been a focus, at least speculation, about infrastructure. If you're going into recession, if we're going to have trouble with employment and the like in the coming year or two, then they're the last things you want to cut. If it's economically productive infrastructure, you want to go ahead with that. It's your recurrent spending you need to wind back.
Look, Chris, I couldn't agree with you more. I think they are absolutely the types of projects we need to be investing in. I've been very concerned by the recent rhetoric of the government when it comes to winding back particularly regional infrastructure investment. We know that as a resource nation, our iron ore exports pay for our universal healthcare system, pay for our free public education. You dig that stuff way up away from capital cities, and you need really serious infrastructure to get it to port. And so the government does need to wind back the rhetoric on cuts to regional infrastructure and, as you say, look to the wider areas of government spending to find the savings.
Just out of interest, where's Peter Dutton these days? I haven't heard from him much.
I was on the phone to him yesterday. He's out and about in electorates, making sure that he's meeting as many Australians as possible. And he's also, obviously, we're trying to make sure that we, are respectful during this period of mourning for Her Majesty as we move towards her memorial service here on the 22nd in Canberra.
Senator, thanks so much for joining us again.
Always.